Today I'm going to show you how to sketch this French Bulldog. We're going to break this image down into basic shapes and take this one simple step at a time. Let's get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a circle, and that's going to be the main head shape. So the next thing is I'm just going to split this into quarters. And what that's going to do is it's going to help give us a point of reference for the other details in the drawing. So now with that done, let's take a look at just this shape. So now this should be a fairly unintimidating shape to draw, so let's get that down on a piece of paper. So I'm just going to place this circle in the middle of my page. Now one thing that we want to consider from the start is the composition, but no need to overthink that too much. A good rule of thumb is that if you split your paper into quarters, you'll want to make sure that the middle point of the circle is centered on the vertical line just above the horizontal line. Then put in those two lines to divide the circle into quarters, and now we're going to move on and continue to look for shapes. Okay, so the next shape that I see in this image is an oval for the snout. So I'm just going to pop that right there, and that'll just give us a pretty good sense of where that snout is. So then when we go to draw it, this is a much easier image to draw than this. So let's add that in. So now going forward, one thing we're really going to want to pay attention to is how these shapes intersect with each other and where they intersect. So for example, we can notice that the very top of this oval intersects with this horizontal line about a quarter of the way through this larger circle. The other thing that we notice is that on the right side, it goes a little bit past this vertical line. And then down here, it extends even further beyond the circle. So the next thing we're going to do is figure out what shape fits the ear. And for me, I'm kind of seeing a trapezoid. So let's just block that in. So if I draw a line going like that, and then more or less a straight line over at the top there, then one coming down on an angle, then I'm just going to join together the trapezoid. And then finally, I'm going to drop a line going like that. So now that we found that shape, let's draw that on the paper as well. There's a couple things here that we might struggle with at first. For example, how do we know how high this line's supposed to go? One thing we can do is we can look at the rest of the shape and see if there's anything that's about the same distance and use that as a reference point. So for example, we know that the distance between the middle of the circle and the very top of the circle is also about the same distance as the top of the ear and the top of the circle. So we can use that as a reference to figure out where the top of the ear should go. So one other part that we might struggle with is how long is this distance supposed to be? Well, if we go to approximately this side of the ear and do a line straight up, we know that this corner of the trapezoid should more or less align with the side of the circle. And after that we can drop the line down on an angle and then connect it a little bit above the halfway point in the circle here. And just like that, we've drawn the ear. Now for the other one. So once again, that's going to be another trapezoid. So now it might be a little tricky to figure out where this trapezoid should go. One thing we can do is we can split this quarter in half. So now it's a little bit easier to figure out where this should go on the circle. Because now we know that this line will start a little bit to the left of the 8th line here. Then if we split this 8th in half, we'll know that this line intersects with this line. So once we know that, we're going to have the same problem where we don't know where the top of this ear should go. If we do a line going straight across horizontally, we'll notice that this distance and this distance is approximately the same. So we know that the top of this ear goes to about in the middle point of this ear. So let's sketch that in as well. Now let's find some of those last lines and shapes. Just for the neck, I'm going to drop a line that goes on an angle like so. And I'm going to have that intersect with the bottom of the ear. And then here for the neck, approximately on this quarter line, I'm going to start the bottom of the neck over here and just draw a curved line like that. And then right now in my sketch, I'm just rounding out the bottom. So if I were to imagine this Frenchie was wearing a shirt, where would the neckline be? Pretty much that's where I'm putting this line. So now that we've got some basic construction lines, now it's time to really make sure that the composition of the portrait feels good before we move on to adding more details. Our sketch so far should feel like it's in the middle of the paper with a little bit of space above, below, and to each side of the sketch. If it feels like there's a ton of space on one side of the drawing and only a little bit of space on the other side, now's the time to move things over. Okay, back to the drawing. So the next thing I want to do is I want to map out the eyes and the nose. So I'm just going to put one oval there, and then I'm going to put a half circle just on the side of the circle here. Then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put another oval for the nose. Okay, so now that I've got the oval for the nose and the eyes in, let's draw that too. So at this point, it might be a little tricky to figure out where these ovals should go on the construction lines we have so far. So one thing we can do is just add a couple more lines to make sure that we're getting everything in the right place. I'm going to split this top left quarter in half again, and I'm going to draw a line going straight down. So once I've put those lines in, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at the top half of the circle and split that line in half. Then I'm going to split it in half once more. Then I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom half of the circle. Then once I've done that, I'm going to extend these lines going all the way to the left. Now by doing that, we know exactly where the eyes and nose are going to go. So for example, with this right eye, we know that the top and bottom of the oval fall directly below these two green lines respectively. We also know that it touches this line that's on an angle, and that the right side of the oval falls slightly to the right of the blue vertical line. Then for the semicircle on the left, we know that the top of the semicircle falls on this green horizontal line here, and the bottom of the semicircle sits just above the halfway line of the entire circle. For the nose oval, I noticed that the top of the oval falls on the blue horizontal line. Now, even though the oval doesn't cleanly align with the green lines I drew, the green lines will still give us enough information to put in the oval. The bottom of the oval intersects with the larger circle halfway between these two bottom green lines, and the left side of the oval is a little bit to the right of the green vertical line. So now with those 3 points, we can draw the oval in the right place. Also, as an aside, don't feel like you need to draw all of these green lines if they're not helpful to you, so you can decide which ones you want to include and which ones you just want to imagine. Okay, now for the next details. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to put in this line that connects the nose to the lips. So now I'm going to drop a line down just to the left of where this larger circle and this larger oval intersect, and then that's going to go to approximately halfway down through the oval, and then that curve for the lips are going to start. For the mouth line, we're just going to draw a curved line. On the left side, just below the green line, we'll follow the shape of the snout oval before curving up and touching both the vertical and horizontal lines. Then it'll curve back down and run under the larger circle, and keep that line going until it touches the bottom of the circle, and then extend it a little bit beyond the vertical line. So at this point, our construction lines are pretty much done, and now we're going to start really cleaning this up and adding all the fine details that's really going to make this look like the reference photo. So at this point, you really want to make sure that all of these shapes are as accurate and proportionate as you can get them. So now I'm just going to lighten all of the lines using a kneaded eraser, just to make sure these lines don't show through too much and confuse me later. I don't want to erase them fully either because I want to make sure that I can still see them. And once you've done that, let's pay close attention to the reference photo to create some descriptive contour lines. What I mean by that is that these lines will define the outline of the subject. By using the construction lines as a reference point, we'll be able to make sure that our contour lines stay proportionate. So I'm just going to start on this side, and as I go along, I'm going to continue to pay attention to how the lines interact with the construction lines that I drew. So for example, I'm going to start on this left side, just around the eye here, and I notice that the eye comes out a little bit beyond the circle that I drew for the head. Then it more or less follows that circle that I drew before. And then just past this halfway point here, I notice that there's a small bump followed by another bump before it connects to the trapezoid. Then continuing on, I notice that it more or less follows the trapezoid line, and then just before the corner it starts to round out before extending up and around. Then it curves out there, and notice how much it extends beyond the blue lines that we drew earlier. Then it comes down on a slight angle before coming in a little bit, going out a little bit, and then coming back in before more or less connecting with the corner of the trapezoid. Then it continues and goes down a little bit before once again connecting with this diagonal line here. So that's the idea of what we're going to do throughout the entire drawing. I'm going to continue down, and I notice that it touches the circle just around the halfway part before going back out again, and then curving down. Now I'm going to make my way back over to the other side, and I'm just going to add a little oval for the eye there, and then just connect that bump to the little oval that we drew. Then for the ear, I notice that the actual ear starts a little bit to the left of where I drew the trapezoid. And it goes out a little bit, and then rounds out at the corner there, and then continues to round out and follow that line before extending down and touching that line from before. So if I get rid of the construction lines that I had earlier, we'll see how these lines are more or less following all of the lines in the reference photo. Then for the nose, I'm just going to draw the top of the nose. So to do this, I'm going to turn down the opacity even more so we see all the details of the nose. So then I notice that the line more or less follows that oval that we drew earlier, just around the edge here, and then I'm going to put in that vertical line. And I'm going to come back and do those nose details a little bit later. So for now, I'm going to turn up the opacity again, and then we can see how the side of the mouth interacts with the oval that we drew for the snout area. So I notice that there's a curved line that extends beyond the oval, and then it comes up and touches the oval around here, and then goes back down and around, and intersects with the neckline and the oval line. I'm also going to put in that mouth, and I notice that that follows the oval that we drew earlier on the left side, and then on the right side, it just curves down, and then just curves around and touches all of these lines that intersect down here. I'm going to turn down the opacity once again so I can see. Then I'm just going to put in the eye here. And we can see how that interacts with the oval that we drew earlier. So the top and bottom line more or less follow the oval. And then if we split the oval in half, we'll notice that the inner corner of the eye falls a little bit below this halfway point, and the outer corner falls just above the halfway point. So now I'm just going to draw the neckline and the neckline on the other side, and I notice that it falls just below this little dip in the ear over here. And it curves down towards that line that we drew before touching it, and then going a little bit higher again. So let's get all of that down on paper. While we do that, I'll show you what these digital lines look like without the reference photo underneath, just so you can see them relative to the construction lines. This is what these contour lines look like without the construction lines. So now I'm going to continue to go ahead and add in some of the even finer details. So just in the eye, I'm going to add the pupil and the iris just by putting the majority of a circle there, and I'm going to leave a little spot there for the highlight. And then the line for the edge of the iris is a circle that almost touches each of the corners of the eye. In addition to drawing the finer details such as the wrinkles, I'm going to start outlining any shifts in color. This can include highlights, shadows, or generally any area where the hair is a slightly different color. Outlining these areas is necessary if you plan on adding color to the drawing later. So continuing on, just about halfway between the eyes, I notice that there's a line here which is kind of a wrinkle, but also kind of a line between lighter and darker fur. So I'm just going to put a line to indicate that change. Then around the middle of the left eye, I notice that that's approximately where this line starts to curve and go to the left, and then meet the very top of the nose approximately where this vertical line is. Next line that I'm going to put in is this big wrinkle over here. So I notice that if I split up the area between the nose and the corner of the eye into approximately thirds, that's about the width and the position of this big wrinkle over here. So let's get those lines in. So if we split this circle back into quarters, I notice that this yellow wrinkle line should extend and go just approximately to that quarter point. And then the top of that wrinkle is more or less a curvy line like that. I notice that there's a bit of a round wrinkle over here that comes to a point like so, before curving down like that. The next thing I'm going to put in is this rounded teardrop shape for this little patch of darker fur up here. Now I'm going to work on the nose, and for the nose, it's really just two little ovals next to the line in the center. And one thing that you'll notice is that the oval on the right is a little bit higher up than the oval on the left. But nonetheless, they're still approximately the same size. Then there's a curved line that just goes around and meets with the nose on the edge there. And then for the bottom of the nose, it's a bit of a curved line that touches that center vertical line there. Then it curves up before curving to the right, and then curving up again to meet this point here, approximately where this more circular wrinkle is on the right here. Now I'm going to go back up here. Then I notice that there's a curved line that goes approximately there, and we can find out where that is, because that's more or less halfway between these two lines here if I draw an angle connecting them. So now as I go along, I'm also just smoothing out some of the lines that I've already drawn, just so they're a lot cleaner. Then there's this tuft of fur on the chest/neck area, and pretty much that's just a line going from the corner of this mouth all the way down on an angle. And honestly, with this area, it doesn't matter if it's not quite as accurate. The main things that you want to be accurate are the facial features, and some of the other things don't quite matter as much because that's not where the viewer's attention is going to be. If you're going for 100% accuracy though, then that's a little bit of a different story, but if you're just trying to get more or less a proportionate sketch, then some of these details down here don't matter quite as much as the facial features. The next part is the ear, and so for the ear, one thing I notice is that there is a line that goes like that. So if we were to create a downward triangle inside of this trapezoid, more or less that's where that line would go. Then I'm just going to have a line going down approximately there. There's a little oval that sits on this line here, as well as a couple other details, like more or less a U shape and a little triangle shape there. And this area is generally kind of fuzzy. And then on the other ear, I'm just going to draw a curved line just to indicate that inner ear. Before we continue on, let's take a moment to catch up and get this all on paper. I'll get rid of the reference photo so we can see how the yellow contour lines look on the blue construction lines. Now I'm going to spend a little bit of time cleaning up all of these lines, really making them smooth, and making sure that they're accurate with the reference photo. So now there's not a whole lot left to do. The main thing is I want to get in some of these wrinkle lines, as well as indicate some of the most obvious highlights and shadows. So for example, there's one big highlight area over here that kind of comes in, and then comes up and then goes down like that. There's another highlight area that comes around the snout here, a smaller wiggly shape around there. And there's this big area on the forehead right there, and approximately there. There's also this line on the back, which is kind of a soft backwards S shape that goes down and on a slight angle. And then there's this lighter area under the eye. Now I'll get rid of the reference photo again so you can see those contour lines on the construction lines. If you're having trouble getting those organic highlight shapes in, another way you can think of this is as if you were using the grid method, because it's exactly the same idea. Think of the construction line shapes as if they were squares in a grid, and try to isolate and replicate each section. For example, take a look at just one quadrant and ignore the rest, then compare your line drawing to this shape. If you do that in combination with finding reference points, such as finding out this part of the highlight is directly to the right of the top of the eye, you should be able to accurately place your lines. So just continuing on for some of the final details, we're just going to put in these little lines for the whiskers down here. This middle line that we drew curves around, and then gets a little bit wavy as it goes towards the bottom of the nose here. Then about halfway between these two lines, let's draw another line that kind of goes down on an angle like that. It comes down to about here before turning. Then there's a little half circle, which kind of makes the line look like a backwards question mark. And then for this area below, kind of extends, comes out from the same point that that other line is, and then there's a bump, a second bump, a third bump, fourth one, and then kind of goes like that. We've also got the lip down here, which is just a curved line that goes like that. And now I'm just going to spend a little bit more time cleaning up my sketch. And at this point I actually felt that the ears in my sketch were a little bit off, so I did take the time to just move those over, which made it feel a little bit more accurate. So that's the other thing. If you've noticed that something's a little bit off, now during the sketching phase is the time to change things, rather than when you're already applying color. So now there's just a few more lines to add. One is a sideways U shape that goes around the corner of the mouth. Then there's a little bit of a semicircle at the bottom, with a little bump on the left side. Then there's this line that goes down here and intersects with that tuft of fur at the bottom. So now this is the part where I'd show you me cleaning up all of my lines and adding those last few details, but you might have noticed that I've already done all that. And that's because I sadly lost the original screen recording that I did alongside the pencil sketch, and so I had to re-record the entire digital drawing. So I tried to line up the two videos as much as possible, so it still kind of felt like they were being done at the same time, but there ended up being some differences along the way. But anyway, in your drawing, this would be the time to add those last few details, and really make sure your lines are looking smooth and clean. So you'll want to erase any leftover construction lines, and if you have any fuzzy lines or any lines that are just generally kind of confusing, You'll want to clean those up so your sketch is as legible as possible. And now, that's pretty much it for this drawing. If you're interested in seeing how I colored this sketch in with colored pencils, check out my last video. Thanks for sticking with me and the sketch, and I hope this helped you to create an accurate sketch of this reference photo. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.